Can we desire what we do not have? We're going to talk about that and other questions here in Wake Up to the Bible. I'm Daniel Kaplan. I'm here with my father, Dr. Kaplan, and we're going through the law, Genesis through Deuteronomy, over the course of this year. Today we're reading Exodus 20:15 through 23. I'll be reading from the Robert Alter translation, and then we will discuss what we have read. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your fellow man. You shall not covet your fellow man's house. You shall not covet your fellow man's wife, or his slave girl, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that your fellow man has. And all the people were seeing the thunder and the flashes and the sound of the ram's horn and the mountain and smoke. And the people saw, and they drew back and stood at a distance. And they saw to Moses, "Speak you with us, that we may hear, and let not God speak with us, lest we die." And Moses said to the people, "Do not fear, for in order to test you, God has come, and in order that his fear be upon you, so that you do not offend." And the people stood at a distance, and Moses drew near the thick cloud where God was. And the Lord said to Moses, "Thus shall you say to the Israelites, you yourselves saw that from the heavens I spoke with you. You shall not make with me gods of silver and gods of gold. You shall not make them for yourselves." And that is the end of that segment. And I have a feeling that command is not going to be followed because I know where the story goes next, which I guess is why they leave it off there. It's a nice little cliffhanger, as it were, for a very unfortunate event that's about to take place.
Yeah, that's a good point. It does dramatically emphasize what happens later.
Yeah, I mean, it puts a button on it that's like, wow, they were literally told exactly not to do what they are about to do, and yet did it anyway. It's also interesting that even though that, well, let's just start there. Even though that was a commandment that was essentially already given to them, it was the second commandment, he reiterates it again, and yet that's what they do, right? The first big commandment violation that we know of, it seems to be one that was repeated right that moment. It's very sad.
I don't know why Robert Alter kind of toned it down.
Which one?
The word chata is to sin.
Where's that?
It's consistently used for sin.
Where's that? They do not offend?
That you not offend. I don't know why.
Oh, I rather like that because I like connecting offense to sin. I do.
Okay.
Just morally.
No,
I like the idea that morally the only way to truly offend is to sin, because I think that's a clarity about morality that we should have.
All right.
It's one reason why I believe in the New Testament when Paul says nothing shall offend you. Right? What he's saying is that if you're acting according to God's will, then people cannot accuse you of offense because you are not sinning. Right? And so if they say make false accusations against you, you should not take it to heart because you are acting morally correct.
Well, my son is an accomplished author, so if he endorses,
not that
if he endorses Robert Alter, who am I to question him?
Thank you. Well, Robert Alter's also an accomplished author too, so there we go.
Right.
2 against 1. He's more of an accomplished author than I am. Accomplished author, really.
There was another comment I was going to make since Daniel did bring up this conclusion.
Yes.
I think also the next section is dealing with a different subject, the subject of sacrifices.
Right.
So it's a good way to
stop it
and then go on to the sacrificial part.
Right. Yeah.
There was something else that... Yes, regarding coveting, again, you see 7 things. Your neighbor's house, wife, servant, male servant, female servant, ox, donkey, or anything. Yeah. So anything. So obviously it's a composite thing. Don't covet. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't divide it, as I said. No. But it not coveting, and you don't covet what's your neighbor's. Now, if you
fellow man's is what he has.
Okay, yeah, that's
because neighbor could imply somebody within your community.
Yeah, neighbor now means somebody nearby, and that's not the point.
Or even it can imply somebody within the Christian community. Not it shouldn't, but yes. Okay, go ahead.
The point I wanted to bring out is that you may want something nice, and that that's not wrong. But if you want something that belongs to somebody else, well, it's his. Right. You don't have any right to want it. Right. It's his. So, but I don't think that having a goal of someday having something nice is wrong. It does say in Psalm 37, Delight yourself in the eternal, he'll give you the desires of your heart.
Right.
Now, on the other hand, if you look at the whole Bible, if it's good for you, if you know, he's not going to give you something that
Cause your destruction.
would be negative for you.
Well, unless it's a test, right?
Yeah, or maybe as a test, but
Yeah.
that's not the well, yeah, but okay, but desires of I don't know if he gives you the desires of your heart as a test. It's possible, yeah, in a way it is because
I would think so.
it does say that prosperity is in a way a test.
Right.
Deuteronomy
I would think
Deuteronomy
so.
7. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
okay.
would think so.
That could be.
So that's kind of like be careful what you wish for, right? In a
There
sense.
you go. Yeah.
But when it comes, the reason why I brought this up is the question. The big question is, can we desire the things? Is I find that Christians can, especially those that are very concerned with certain economic systems, can oversell the case about covetousness because they can make something like a system that financially incentivizes the people in order to encourage behavior, a system that is entirely built on coveting. And that is not actually true. Um,
Right.
if you put out an advertisement that says, wow, if you give us money, you can do this really awesome vacation, and then that causes the person to work harder and therefore get the vacation, coveting was not really taking place. You could argue that that wasn't necessarily the best use of the person's time, that they were shallow or whatever, fair enough, but that's not a coveting situation because, like my dad said, coveting is specifically the idea of a zero sum game, that because you are gaining something, somebody else is losing something. In my opinion, biblically speaking, it is not your neighbor has a really beautiful wife and a really beautiful house and a car, and you're like, wow, I really wish I could live like that. I'm going to make adjustments so I can have a wife that's like that, or a house that's like that, or things like that. I do not believe that is coveting at all.
And the Apostle Paul does bring out that this is a kind of a this is an attitude or something mental, and
Right.
it's the only one of this sort really. All the others are just actions,
Right.
and here we have some, and so this is a very interesting commandment to conclude with.
Well, it is interesting, and I think the reason why the difference matters, right, is that it's so destructive. Wanting
Right.
something similar or an analog is not necessarily going to be destructive. It could be, right, because you could be like, well, if you're just really bent out of shape over comparing yourself to somebody else and their financial status, that can really run you ragged. Fair enough. But that is not the same as specifically envying a specific thing that in order to obtain, you have to take it from somebody else. When you get to that level, there is really no positive ramification to that. That is going to simply be destructive because it either will mean you will steal it from the other person, which is a violation, or you will be so bitter and resentful that you don't have it that you'll be in violation. It's just there is nothing positive that can come from that. You know what I mean? There's nothing positive from something like that.
Would you summarize, repeat what your comment just there?
What I said was, desiring something that is similar is not necessarily self-destructive.
All
It
right.
can lead to self-destruction if you're, let's say, imagine it's like, wow, I wish I was as wealthy as Elon Musk. Okay, that could be self-destructive because it could make me make bad decisions to get
Right.
to that level.
Right.
But that's not the same thing as saying, wow, I wish I was married to Elon Musk's wife and I just won't be happy unless I am. There's what positive thing could possibly come because either I would abduct her
Yeah.
or I'll just be bitter and resentful that I'm not married to her. There's
Right.
nothing positive that can come from that.
I see that. I'm glad. Okay, and
You see the difference, right?
yeah.
And desiring something, I'm getting, the love of money is the root of all evil. I
Right.
get
It's
that.
yeah, a root.
Is a root, yes, right. And it's the love of money. It's not money itself, right?
Right. Yeah.
So yes, you can be greedy, but that's not what this is really about. This because it's a more severe thing. The Ten Commandments are about broader principles than something like greed. Because I don't want to say greed is good, but greed is a nuanced concept in terms of what even is greed. This is talking about something we can define.
This is a
We can
matter of
define very clearly. It is the desire to take something that is not yours.
is related to envy, and that's probably a motive for Canaan murdering Abel. It's a motive
Yeah,
for Esau hating Jacob,
Right.
and so on,
Right.
motive for anti-Semitism
Right.
in our time.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, envy is very different than desire, right? Because in a sense, you could say, wow, I really envy the fact that Elon Musk has a lot of
mm,
money and power. I wish I was on that level. You could say that, but it's not, doesn't have to be envy. It could just be like, you know,
that's
I admire,
borderline
it could be
there.
more like, it could be more like admiration for the level they got, and then taking that and being like, well, what can I extract from the decisions they make to maybe better myself in order to get closer to it? But there's a difference there, right? There's a difference. And then it certainly is a difference when you get to the point of, if I don't have what he has and the only way to get it is by him not having it, I won't be happy. That's a very big difference.
Uh, the,
Because it just means you're living constantly ungrateful for your current status and wanting to hurt somebody else.
uh, well, you should be generally satisfied with what you have. You know,
Sure.
like Timothy talks about that.
Yeah. That's right. But I think the reason why that's not the commandment is because that's a nuanced idea. This is
Right,
commandments are something you can nail down. You know, this is, you can nail down, like adultery. You can nail that down. Like, what is it specifically talking about?
right.
And as I can specifically say, the commandment is that. That doesn't mean these other things are not things to worry about. But I
Yeah.
think we can be, because this is why I talk about it. They'll people be like, well, it's like the whole American economy is based on coveting.
No,
No,
not
that's
really.
not really fair. That's overly reductive. That is overly
Now, to
reductive. To
now,
some extent, yes,
yes, but
but
not.
it is overly reductive.
That's yeah, I agree. Yeah, and but I did want to mention that in Colossians 3:5, it says covetousness, which is idolatry. So
Right.
it kind of ties it all
And
together.
here's the thing, why is it idolatry? I have a theory.
Go ahead.
The theory is the reason why it's idolatry is that ultimately, who is responsible for the fact that Elon Musk has all of his stuff? Well, technically it's God. And so technically I'm saying God did a lousy job. He gave the wrong person the stuff.
I
So it's
see.
idolatry because I'm putting myself above God or
Right,
another God or whatever, another religious system or
right,
something.
right,
I'm rejecting his sovereignty
right,
because he could have made me with Elon
right.
Musk's money. And just so for the record, I do not resent the fact that Elon Musk has a lot more money than I do, because I know to make the personal sacrifices that Elon Musk had to do to get there, I would never do. I am not worthy of that money. I'm just saying. I have no problem with that.
Well, it doesn't
Now
matter.
I will say that we do have a culture that is moving towards coveting in the way that income disparities are talked about, because a lot of people are making the case now that the only reason why there's differential is because of something broken morally, and that's not always true, and that is a violation of Leviticus, and we'll talk about it later. And yes, that can become like idolatry, because what you're doing is you're rejecting the idea that within God's plan you do not have equity of outcome. You do not. So if you have a problem with that, if you have a problem that in this life there's not equity of outcome, you have a problem with God. I'm just saying. I know that's controversial, but that's true.
It also in our day is combined often with racial hatred, with
Yes,
ethnic tensions,
right.
and so Jesus talked about hatred as the root of murder.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
so
hatred without cause, and this would
yeah,
be that
right,
would be the case
mm,
in sometimes. Sometimes,
right,
yes, right.
right,
Because if you hate somebody just because they have more than you, that might be without cause. In fact, often it is.
right.
It just depends. Let's go back to stealing. Stealing is an interesting commandment because it is the only commandment I can think of that doesn't have a limiting principle. Because coveting is, again, it's about something specific. It's something somebody has that you don't. Um, Lying, I guess, is not all that limiting, but stealing is really like completely limitless. What does that mean? Steal what? And I think I agree with those. I know Dennis Prager makes this point that this commandment, if almost none other were followed, would make a dramatic impact on society. The idea of, if you take this to the full extent of stealing, you can go quite broad with it, because it's really and it really encompasses a lot of other things, right? Because You can't commit adultery without stealing. You can't covet without the desire to steal. You can't lie without stealing because you're stealing somebody's free will because they can't make a decision. They don't have the information, right? You can't violate the Sabbath without stealing because it's a time issue. Like it really encompasses a lot
If you're not working properly, if you're wasting your employer's time
with
in a way, you're
stealing,
stealing from him.
right? Yeah, so many things.
I would like to
If
mention.
you don't give somebody proper credit for something, you're stealing.
You mentioned Dennis Prager.
I did.
He made a very wonderful contribution when he talked about kidnapping. This is often applied
Yes.
by Jews to kidnapping.
Right.
The whole slave trade.
Right. The
Would not,
chattel slavery of
would,
like the Atlantic slave
yeah,
trade
would
is a
not,
violation of this.
yeah,
Yeah.
would not have happened
Yeah.
if,
Right. Even if people want to talk about biblical slavery, which we will have to talk about because it comes up, it was clearly not what a lot of people think of as slavery because of the way it was used
right.
in the Americas and then the British colonies and stuff like that, because that involved kidnapping and you cannot steal. So that's clearly not what it's talking about.
Yeah, and not to raise wrong issues, but within Africa, as far as I understand, African tribes subjugated people from other tribes and sold them to Europeans.
Right.
It wasn't that Europeans had to just sort of roam through the jungles and try to catch people. That would have been very inefficient. As far as I know, they came and then Africans sold other Africans to them. I think
But
that's
that's where the stealing took place.
yeah. But I think I just wanted to bring this up so that obviously it was wrong on both ends, but now it's being used in a way.
Well, the big reason
As
why I have an issue with it is that people will say that the Bible condones slavery. And when you use that term
yes,
for a
you're
modern audience,
right.
immediately they're thinking of something like the slave
Slave
trade in
trade.
America. And that is, of course, never true.
No, right, right,
That is not the case. That
right,
is not the system that is talked about in the Bible. It
right,
is a violation of the Ten Commandments. It could not exist. And so
right.
let's be careful about that. Let's be careful about what it's talking about. And this is where word definitions can change over time. And
Slavery.
to some extent, I think, unfortunately, at the time that some of the translations were written, they did not have a correct view of it either. And so I think one reason why you don't see the language choices we do is because of the agenda at the time, unfortunately.
The Western Christian world got rid of slavery as we understand it. Got rid of it long before the Muslim world did. When I was a boy, is when I think Saudi Arabia finally abolished it. I think if you look up in the history, it was like around 1960 or
Right.
so that it was abolished in Saudi Arabia.
Right. And people will still speak to slavery that exists because it does.
There's still a lot.
Still does. And it even exists within a lot of Western countries in the form of sex slavery.
Right. Yeah.
And that involves stealing again. And I'm obviously sex slavery is wrong on multiple levels, biblically speaking. But just at the root of it, it's stealing, right? So just that alone would solve the problem.
When I began to find out how much slavery is a factor in our modern world, I used to read Revelation and wonder about the concept of slavery in the future, because Revelation brings it out.
Right.
But now that I know what's going on in the world, I don't have that question anymore.
Unfortunately,
sadly.
Slavery in a slavery is something that does seem to be a human constant, and not only that, but a slavery that the Bible doesn't in any way condone. Just like a lot of other things that the Bible doesn't condone. But I mean, it sounds very. It can sound very justifying to people who don't, really like the Bible. And you're like, well, that's not the biblical definition of slavery. But the Bible defines everything. It defines marriage. It defines food. So of course there's going to be a biblical definition of slavery, just like anything else. There's a biblical definition of a day. There's a biblical definition of everything. Like you have to. That's the way you have to approach the text is within itself. You can't apply your own baggage. That's the whole point, is that you can't apply your own moral baggage, right? So when it's talking about principle, when it's talking about systems, you have to think of the biblical system. You can't think of the world system and then be like, oh, the Bible's talking about the world system. Not necessarily. Only when it's in compliance with the Bible, which is not very often. So I mean, that's where you can end up where, people believing that the Sabbath, it says in the Bible that you should keep the Sabbath, and that means Sunday, because they don't read the text and they realize, okay, the biblical definition of the Sabbath is not the first day of the week, it's the seventh day of the week, Same sort of thing. All right.
I hope I didn't word anything awkwardly there.
No, you're okay. I think you're okay.
Okay.
It's a hairy issue. It's a hairy
Daniel's
issue.
okay with what I said.
It's a hairy issue.
All right. If you're not okay with what I said, then
yes, please comment below. We certainly do not want to offend people or
I'd
anything
appreciate
like
it if you politely let me know. But...
or you can be mean about it. I'll soften it for my father. It's okay.
Thanks a lot.
Apparently, you have an issue. It's the internet. Nobody's nice.
Some idea came to me, by the way. After the sabbatical year is over, maybe we should next year have these discussions on Gospels and Acts. Just continue right on.
It's possible.
So, that might,
if it's popular,
might be an idea. Right, it might be an idea.
If it's not popular, we won't do it. How about that? It's a little challenge. All right. Okay, so here is another one. You shall not bear false witness. We didn't talk about that. What do you think is the difference between reading it as Alter has it translated, and it's pretty common to put it this way, you shall not bear false witness against your fellow man, and how a lot of people extract it, which is do not lie? Because I think there is a difference. But go ahead.
The way he does it, I guess you could say, partly it's intent.
You shall not bear false witness against your fellow men.
Yeah, like you're doing something.
Well, I mean, I don't think this is. I do not think that giving false information incorrectly, like it's just a mistake, is what this commandment is about, and I don't think anybody believes that.
No,
that's not a lie. But the question is this a lie? And I would say no, because I believe this is specifically referring to the kind of witness that you would have for somebody in like a trial or something like that. However, that being said, before you make the case that I'm going to say the Bible condones dishonesty, I'm going to go back to the last commandment, and it shall not steal. And I think robbing somebody of information that they need in order to make a decision is stealing, and so therefore dishonesty applies there. So even if you want to be like me and have a very close read on the ninth commandment, I believe the eighth commandment still ends up covering dishonesty. Now, why
there are other verses on it too.
Right. But I'm talking about this in the commandments. But yes, you're right. Obviously, walk in truth and all of that.
And Paul tells you not to lie.
Let your yes be yes. Right. Well, does he say don't lie like that?
He says don't lie.
Okay.
Don't lie to one another.
Don't lie to one another, though, is not the same thing. Because, again, that's the question.
Oh, you mean you could lie to a non-Christian? Is that the idea?
Could you lie to a Nazi is the question. But, I mean, that's a question.
I don't think Paul meant it that way when he said don't lie to one another. But
you don't think he meant to be...
in other words, but it's okay to lie to somebody who's not in the church. I don't think that's what the intent was there.
It depends on. Yeah. See, this is where I think it matters. Okay, so let's. I think we're going to get into a disagreement. So because let's say this is bearing false witness against somebody, right? Yeah. So this is talking. The ninth commandment is specifically don't give a false testimony in order to get somebody in trouble. Okay, fair enough. Okay. And then the eighth commandment is do not steal information from people in order for them to make a decision, right?
Includes that.
Yeah. Right. Obviously, it doesn't say that explicitly. Right, I'm drawing that from the point of any steal. It doesn't have a limiting principle on stealing, and it is stealing something when you do not give people the right. However, that gives you a little more wiggle room for that Nazi at the door situation. I guess you could say you're still stealing from them, but on the other hand, there's somebody else who's going to be stolen, which
Right.
is the life of somebody else. So you have two stealings and you get to pick. And so I like using it from that perspective because it allows you to be as legalistic as you want to the letter of the law and yet be fine.
Well, even so, under the old covenant, killing in self-defense was
I'm
there.
not talking about the old covenant. I'm talking about the new covenant.
Oh, okay. I see. All right.
And I would say a Christian who lies to a Nazi is not necessarily violating the Ten
Yeah.
Commandments.
Okay. I would.
And that was my case.
Okay.
That is,
Yeah.
I
No.
walked you
Yeah.
through how word for word read of the Ten Commandments can lead you to saying that that was not a violation.
Yeah. Okay. Fair
You do
enough.
not have to agree with it. And again, I am not trying to make an exception or in order to get rid of
Well,
the concept of
hi-
honesty.
hiding
I
the
am extremely into honesty. In fact, I'm brutally honest.
hiding
But
the person anyway is somewhat deceptive. Just hiding the person. If the person's hiding in your home, that's already somewhat of a deception. If you want to get really technical about it, he's
yeah,
because you're hiding him.
true.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, right. But it's like what stealing is worse. It puts you in a
Yeah.
weird situation where something is being stolen and then you have to prioritize. And I would say the stealing of a life is more important than the stealing of information.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Absolutely.
mean,
Yeah.
and this is where you have like let's go back to what we were talking about a while ago. This is why I think you do have discussions, right? And you have these people because I could be wrong. Let's say maybe I'm wrong and I'm actually
You could be wrong. All right. Go
wow,
ahead.
Dad. No, I could be wrong, and maybe somebody should tell the truth to the Nazi, and the fact that they're not is a lack of faith on their part, and they should think it will work out no matter what. I'm not going to say that somebody who says that is
Well, now wait
necessarily
a minute.
wrong.
What you do, what you do is somehow say something that's somewhat ambiguous or evasive. You don't just come right and say, "Yeah, he's in here."
You
You don't.
could,
Yeah, but no, that's no. No, wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. There's a scripture there,
but
and
what if
even
it's a yes
Jesus.
or what if it's a yes or what if they literally put a gun by your head? Are they in here? Yes or no? What is your option?
Well, that's all right. That's a good
That's
point.
my point.
That's a
Okay.
good point.
So, and I would say I can sympathize with somebody who says they should say yes because you should because you can't lie and therefore and you should have the faith that it'll work out. I'm not going to tell the people they are I mean, I'm
No,
going to disagree with them. I think they are wrong, but I'm not going to be dogmatic about it. But my point is this is the way that you have to parse the law out because ultimately where I would stand on it is is uh is you shall not is getting back to the you shall not steal versus the bearing false witness. And this is why I do not like people making that strict dishonesty in that sort of way.
there's
I
a
think that's not
there's a
beneficial.
Jewish principle of pikuach nefesh. That there's only three things that you die for.
I mean that's a fair custom, but
you
you
don't
can't
commit.
support that really biblically. Like that's a tradition. But go ahead, it's not a bad tradition. I agree. Go
No,
ahead.
that you idolatry,
Right.
adultery, and murder are things you die rather than do.
Right.
But but it's not it's based on the Bible. It may not be in the Bible literally, but it's based on think putting all the scriptures together and coming up with that
Hmm.
notion. And
Well,
so
this is where it gets
yeah.
into prioritizing the commandments, right?
And
Because
by the way,
imagine here's another thing, right? Imagine somebody came to my house and they abducted me and they put a gun by
right,
my head and they said, "Unless you go into the bank and steal $5,000, we're going to murder you." Well, there's a question in a sense because do I do it because having them murder me is the worst sin of stealing the money, right? And this is where and again, this gets back to why Jethro and the judges and stuff, because there is a rubbing against each other of the rules, and you do end up having to figure out a lot of these moral quandaries are not should the standards not exist. It's a matter of prioritizing which one over the other. Does that make sense? And sometimes you have to do that. You have to figure out what is going to be the lesser sin, because your hand is forced into committing some sin, or some sin is going to get committed, and you have to figure out what is the best option.
I was looking for 1 John
That,
5 there.
a sinless situation does not exist.
1 John 5.
And this is where I get so aggravated with people that will use exceptions in order to deny the moral principles altogether, because that's not the point. The point is
Right.
not that moral principles don't exist. The issue is that there's a question, because you're just trying to figure out which moral principles should be emphasized in this moment, which is a completely different question than whether or not the moral principles are not true.
Yeah, right. That is a point. People want to.
Yeah. It's the exception that proves the rule sort of concept. Sean was mentioning, Peter denied Jesus 3 times for fear of death, right? And that was obviously a sin. That was not a, I, in my opinion, I don't think the Bible makes it seem like he had the option to do that. That was not being bold. But if you think about it, the difference between that and the Nazi is that the Nazi is going to kill somebody else. Whether or not your life is in jeopardy is a question, and I would say that violates the Jewish principle, because that is basically a denial of God, and that is something you die for.
There is sin leading to death. I do, so.
There is sin leading to death.
But he says, let me read the whole verse.
Okay.
1 John 5:16. If anyone sees his brother sinning, a sin which does not lead to death,
right,
he will ask, and he will give him life for those who commit sin not leading to death. There is sin leading to death. I do not say that you should pray about that.
Right.
So there are some sins that are not as serious a matter as others, according to that verse.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's where you need the wisdom. And so that's where I would say why you have. Otherwise, what would be the point, right? If it was that simple, if it was that cut and dry, why would you need the hierarchy that Jethro was talking about? Why would Moses create that sort of hierarchy? The reason why you have that hierarchy of people that are skilled and learned is because exactly what you just said. Because if it was just as simple as, well, the Bible says don't do it, so don't do it, then you wouldn't need that. But you do need that because of what my dad just said. Does that make sense?
Well, the point,
and not because there are times that you just put the law on hold. That's not the point. The point is what principle of the law has priority that moment. That's the point. You never put the law on hold. That's not a thing.
Right. And yeah, the Bible's is only going to have so much in it.
It can't give you nuance for every situation.
Not cover everything.
Right. It covers things on average, right?
Yeah.
But if you think about how complex life is, you're going to have situations where things rub against each other all the time.
There was a minister a long time ago who did a Bible study, and he took some of these rules that we're going to be reading about hopefully next week.
Yeah.
And he tried to make a scenario, and he actually fumbled a bit here and there because he wasn't nuanced enough. Right. He got some backlash on it.
Right.
So you have to be careful.
Yes.
These are basic principles, but you need a whole system to enforce them appropriately, apply them appropriately.
Right. Yeah. And that's why I do not like at the core going so simple as you shall not lie for the commandment. I think that it says do not bear false witness for a reason. It is written in that way for a reason, because the core principle is not involving the honesty concept in the same way that people are talking about. It's specifically about a robbing of justice sort of concept, in my opinion.
All right, but
not that honesty is not a moral constant in the Bible, but I think the reason why it doesn't go down to that root is not to paint you into a corner in that way, if that makes sense. And I don't want people to get fudgy about it. I'm making a very nuanced point.
Right. I'm saying what Daniel said is not necessarily what everybody's going to say.
No.
You could take it to mean you shall not lie. Many people do understand it that way.
Right. Is that how you understand it, I guess?
I lean to
okay.
That,
all right. Okay. And if you do, I'm not going to say that's anti-biblical, because clearly the general principle of not lying is a biblical principle. I just think it's not written that way for a reason. And I think it's to help people like the judges that Moses was talking about navigate these situations.
No, I wouldn't disagree that the emphasis is there.
Mm-hmm.
That there is a certain emphasis in the way it's written. I would definitely.
Right.
And later on we're going to read in Deuteronomy 16:20. It says that Kirdov, justice you shall pursue.
Right.
And
yeah.
So that's a very critical matter.
Right. All right. That being said, anything else before we move on?
No, this has been some pretty heavy issues were discussed here, so there may be some feedback.
It ain't heavy. You're my brother, right?
That will come. And, in years to come, if more people are exposed to this, we might get some excitement down the line.
I know, like 10 years from now, they'll be like, I can't believe you said that. That's okay. If you're watching this 10 years later, I'll probably get a notification and we might begin a really wonderful conversation. So feel free to do so.
Hopefully we'll be alive and well to deal with that.
Well, hopefully I will.
Yeah. Well, thanks. All right.
Hopefully we both are.
Yeah.
Anyway, please like, subscribe. I sounded like a horrible person. I apologize. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell, and we will see you tomorrow.